Okay.
Oh, my God, I got a million emails from you. Yeah.
So, Gregory Nava actually has a thumb from Ebertfest, but he told us that he got his in the very early days before they were golden. So he said his is kind of pewter. So, Gregory, we'd like to present you with a golden thumb tonight.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. Now I have 2 thumbs up. Thank you, Chaz. Here, let me give you a hug. Thank you. Thank you.
We can hold that backstage for you.
Thank you. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
It's a heavy thumb.
And we have on stage with you tonight Claudia Puig, who was the winner this year of the Roger Ebert Award at the African American Film Critics Association. And she's the first Latina woman to head the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. She's NPR. She's awesome. Claudia Puig.
As if we don't know each other.
Yeah, I know.
And we also have Monica Castillo. And you will notice that it's no accident. I wanted to have Latina women up here to talk about Selena with Greg Nava. I hope that's okay with you two, and with you too. Monica
Marvelous.
Castillo.
Okay, so we go sit down. I'll sit in the center here. And before we begin, I just want to say that when you are directing a film, there's a lot of things going on and you have a lot of things to do. And so a very important person is the second unit director who shoots all of these footage. And when you see this film, all these crowd shots, all these bus shots with the tremendous landscapes, you know, all of the Super 8 for all that gritty feeling at the end and during the fashion show sequence. All of this was done by the second unit director of the film, who is with us tonight. And it is a Latina, Barbara Martinez Jitner. I'd like her to stand up. She's absolutely fearless, and she gets the footage, and as you saw, that's really what is one of the things that makes the film so visually beautiful is all the marvelous work that she did. Thank you, Barbara.
So I would love to ask you about the performance of Jennifer Lopez, because we were talking over lunch earlier about how you kind of discovered her. You cast her in La Familia. And then she has this, in every review I was reading, including Rogers, was saying that this is her start, this is her ticket to stardom.
Yes.
And of course, now she is.
Yes.
Has been for a while. But what did you see in her, and what did you nurture in her, and what did you see, how did she prepare for this role?
Well, you know, when I was making Mi Familia at New Line, in my films, the women roles are as important as the men's roles, and it was a story of my family. And so at that time, and that was 1995, you know, we had Eddie Olmos, and we had Jimmy Smits, and we had Isai Morales. We had star names for the male roles, but there were no female Latinas stars. And so New Line said to me, look, Greg, you have to cast non-Latinas because, you know, Marissa Tomei or, you know, Annabelle Sciarra or whoever, because there are no Latinas. And I said, there are Latinas.
They don't exist.
It's just they don't ever get an opportunity. You know, that and I refuse to cast a non-Latinas in this role. I want Latinas in the role. And they're saying, so you want us to cast all unknowns? And I said, yes, all unknowns, but they're brilliant. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they were there. And so I am very stubborn, and so they finally said, okay. And fortunately, the executive producer, who is Francis Ford Coppola, backed me on this. So I have to, give a shout out to Francis. So we had an open casting call for the roles in Mi Familia, and one of the actresses who came in, who'd never been in a movie, she was a fly girl on In Living Color. She'd never been in a film, and that was Jennifer Lopez. And she was marvelous, and we gave her a role in the film Mi Familia. And I'll never forget when we got the first rushes back of her first scene, because one of the things about being a star, we didn't have the money to do filmed auditions for that. We did it on videotape. So the first film that was ever shot of her was this close-up in Mi Familia, and the minute it hit the screen, everybody in the screening room just went, oh my God. This is a person that the camera adores, and she really comes off in the screen. And when we first showed the movie to Francis, when he saw the movie, he immediately leaned over to me and said, who is that? Who is she? And of course, Maria Canals and Constance Marie, who's also in Selena, that was also their first film, and all of them have had marvelous careers, and they got all the great reviews for Mi Familia. So when Selena came along, of course, Warner Brothers said we should consider Jennifer to play this part, but the Quintanilla family would not offer the role to anybody. They insisted that we have an open audition and that we have auditions, and they wanted to see who would play Selena. So we had a lot of we had like 10,000 people in Los Angeles alone that auditioned for Selena. There was like 30 or 40,000 young women came to audition for that film. It was insane, right? So I took out to dinner a lot of, the most famous, Latinas who actually had careers, like Jennifer and several other actresses. I don't want to mention their names because they didn't get the part, but I took them out to dinner and I said, look, I can't offer you this part, you have to audition. And so I took Jennifer out and I said, we can't offer you this part. I said, you have to audition for the role. And Jennifer is just the most fantastic person. She goes, I don't mind. A couple of them said, no, I'm not going to audition. You can't offer it to me. I'm not doing it. Jennifer goes, I don't mind. I'll audition. I'll put myself up against anybody. And if I'm not the right person to do this role, then somebody else should get it. So she, gets the outfit and she starts studying the videotapes of Selena. And we do this filmed audition, and we must have auditioned about 20. We actually did film auditions of about 20 or 30 actresses. And then we sat down with the Quintanillas, and everybody watched the auditions, and it was just clear that Jennifer Lopez was this just unbelievable performance. And when I watch the movie today and you see these, what an extraordinary performance, just brilliant and in every way. She really channeled Selena for this part. She studied like crazy. She is primarily an actress, Jennifer Lopez. That's her first thing, and at this time, that's what she wanted to be. She had no idea of having a musical career at all right? So when you see her doing all that incredible dancing, it doesn't come out of somebody who had ever done that before. What she did was, she had talent as a dancer, but what she did is she studied all of Selena's tapes, and this was evident at the audition level. Everybody else danced like they dance. Jennifer didn't do that. She didn't dance like she dances. She studied Selena's tape, and she did it like an actress. She imitated Selena at all the various periods in her career, because Selena, the dancing evolved, and you see that in the film. Like when the first bustier, she's dancing, and then by the time she does the Houston Astrodome concert, she's far more accomplished, and she captured all of that. And if you put the Houston Astrodome Selena concert against what we filmed with Jennifer, they would be exactly the same, because she imitated her perfectly. And so she brought her acting talent not only to her emotional performance in the dramatic scenes, but also in her dancing. She put it all together. And people always ask me about the singing in the film, and that is Selena's voice in the film. Jennifer's lip syncing.
Who here thought it was Jennifer Lopez?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't a singer at the time. She didn't sing. And the other thing is, of course, for Selena's fans, we had to use Selena's voice because she had one of the most extraordinary instruments, really, in all of pop music. It was a brilliant singer. But she lip synced it so perfectly that everybody thinks she's singing. It's very hard to lip sync. And when we did the I Could Fall in Love scene, it was originally just supposed to be she's in the studio singing, and that's it. And Ed Lockman and I looked at each other and we thought, my God, what she is emoting Jennifer, and her lip syncing is so perfect, we can put the camera right here. That shot is like that. And just move around her and let her do that number. And so we did, spontaneously in the moment, because what Jennifer was doing emotionally, her expressions, she's singing in English for the first time, and she's a native English speaker, and all her life, she struggled to be able to sing in English, and that meant the world to her, and Jennifer captured the emotion of that, and her lip syncing. You couldn't normally, when someone is lip syncing, you can't put the camera here and tell, but you can't tell that it's not her singing. And it was such a powerful moment, and we put it in the movie, and it's like everybody's favorite musical number in the movie because it's so simple, and her performance just carries it. And really, Jennifer Lopez made this movie with her extraordinary work. Brilliant.
I wanted to ask a bit about the writing process. How closely did you work with Abraham on getting all of the details of the band and her life?
This is a good question. Okay, so I always like to work from real life, and from, when I did El Norte, I interviewed all the undocumented, and so for this film, I spent a lot of time with the family, interviewing them all, and a lot of time looking at tapes of Selena, because they took tons of these tapes. And we all studied them to make the movie, but I got a lot of Selena's character from watching the videotapes of her. But everybody tells me their story. And it was very fresh in their minds because, the movie was released on the second anniversary of Selena's killing. We made it very quickly of when Selena was shot. So everything was very fresh in their mind. So they sit down, and I'm talking to Chris Paris, who I just saw fairly recently.
I heard he hadn't seen the movie. Is that true for a very long time?
He has now seen it. He didn't see it for like 20 years, or like almost 20 years. But then he finally sat down and saw it, and we were talking about it. And it was so funny because this guy has still not gotten over Selena's death. He's still in love with her, like you see in the film. It was very moving. But anyway, so he says, I don't know if Abraham's going to want you to know what really happened. And I said, I don't care about Abraham. You tell me what really happened. So he says, okay. So he starts telling me this whole story. And he starts telling me about how they elope, okay? Now, when you say the writing, when you see that scene, which I've always gotten a lot of kudos for writing this brilliant scene with Jennifer, with Selena and Chris deciding to elope. But I didn't write it. That is exactly, I have the tape. He was saying the dialogue. And then Selena said this, and then I said this, and then Selena said that. And I said, all those girls with the colorful dresses, bridesmaids. That's what he told me. That's what happened. He remembered it like it was yesterday, So he told me this whole thing, and I said, okay. So I wrote it in the script. So Abraham reads the script. He did not know that it was Selena's idea to elope. He had always thought it was Chris, this mean guy, who had, talked his daughter into this. So he reads the script, and he reads in there that it was Selena's idea to elope. Well, you know what he's like, because you saw the movie. And he is really like that. And he went out of his mind. He was like bug-eyed angry and screaming at me. So I thought, okay, I'll take a page out of Selena's book and give him a day to calm down. And then I had to go and talk to him about it. And I said, Abraham, this is what really happened. And he goes, yeah, but I don't want every little girl going out there thinking they can run off. She's a role model against her father's, wishes, And I said, look, she's like you, she's independent. And he goes, yeah, and she's strong, and she's asserting herself, and that's why who she was. And, you want to tell young women to have, their own, to become their own person, and blah, 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 blah. And if you have to look, and then, so I told him all that, and he goes, well, you know what, you're right, Greg. He says, and if I have to look bad in order for people to know how good my daughter was, then I'm willing to do it. So he approved it, and then we did it that way in the film. But most of the scenes that you see are actually, the dialogue is more or less taken from people describing what they saw. And everything that's in the movie is based on something that really happened. The whole thing with anything for Selena's with
Selena's,
the broken,
yeah.
anything for Selena's. I got that story, All of the stories are and Chris, after he saw the movie, he told me what I did wrong in the movie, which was very little. But he said that the scene in the hotel room in Los Angeles where they destroy the hotel room, he said, I wasn't sitting back watching, playing the guitar. I was participating.
I wondered about that, because it seemed like he was such a goody two-shoes.
Yeah, right. But apart from that, he said that we got it pretty right.
I'm really curious about the ending, because you really focus so much, and rightly so, on her life and her family. And, we don't meet the woman who kills her until, fairly close to the end. What was your thinking about that, and how did that evolve? Did you always plan that, or how did that come about?
Well, that's an excellent question, because how to do the ending of a film like this, where it ends tragically and she does get murdered, is very hard. And I have a big thing about violence in films and how it's done. So that was a huge, huge question. One thing that I knew that I was not with a predominantly Hispanic audience in watching the film today. When we watched it at Cinespia with the 5,000 people, the minute Yolanda appears on the screen, the place, oh my God, you thought the earth was shaking, She is the most hated person in Texas and throughout, the Southwest, Yolanda Saldívar. But the studio wanted a far more, here's this woman, she gets killed by her fan club president. This attracted them to the material. They thought this was sensational, and that's the movie they wanted me to make. And it is not the movie that I wanted to make. I was thinking about whether or not I should do this or not. And I was walking in Venice, where I was living at the time, Venice, California, and these little girls, about 8 and 10 years old, Latinas, and they were wearing Selena t-shirts. And I said, why do you love Selena? And they looked up at me and said, because she looks like us. And I went, I'm going to make a movie for these girls because they need someone who looks like them on the screen, because they never get to see that. So I knew that we had to make the movie that celebrated her life, celebrated her dreams, celebrated her family, and I was not going to spill Selena's blood on the screen for the studio. And fortunately, one of the co-presidents of Warner Brothers at the time, and I must tip my hat to him, Bill Gerber, and to Courtney Valenti, who was the vice president. I told them what I wanted to do and why, and they agreed and they let me do it. And so now I had to grapple with this, how do we do the actual scene where she gets killed? And, I'm a Latino, and I do all my films in dream reel style. And so this whole ending of the film is dream realist. I didn't want to have any dialogue about it, the family talking about it or dealing with it or anything like that. And I thought, how do you do this? And it opens up this question of how do you do violence, horrific violence in a film. And then I thought of Greek tragedy. When you see a Greek tragedy, there's horrible violence in it. Clytemnestra axes Agamemnon in the bathtub, with an axe, for Christ's sake. Oedipus rips his eyes out, horrible. But you never see that violence on stage. What you see is the consequences of the violence. You see, after the act happens, how it affects everybody that this violence touches. And I thought, this is the way to do it. And as a matter of fact, this is the way I think violence should be done in the films, because all we see is violence, but it never has any consequences. So she goes into her dream, and then this, Rose comes on the stage, and something's wrong, and you hear I just wanted it to be with radio and television announcers and a lot of fragmented, textural images. We did it in Super 8, low-grade video and film, and intercut it so it's very fragmented. So you know what's happened. But the first thing is that you see how this act affects the killer. And you see Lupe Ontiveros, who plays Yolanda Saldivar, with the gun at her head. And she was there for many hours, like 8 hours, surrounded by the police, with a phone on one ear and the gun at the other, talking. And, we got a lot of help in Texas doing this. And they actually, against the law, technically, they slipped those tapes to us. So we actually heard what Yolanda was saying. And I sat there with Lupe Ontiveros, and who's a fantastic actress, by the way. She's marvelous in El Norte. She's great in Mi Familia. She was in As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson. Great actress. And she really wanted to play this part. And so we listened to these tapes together, and oh my God, they're just wrenching, like you see in the film. And at this one moment, Yolanda Saldivar goes, I want my mother. I've just killed my best friend. I want my mother. And Lupe goes, I want to do that. And I said, it's very powerful, but if you say, you're crying, you say, I want my mother, it's going to get a laugh. It's not going to work, okay? She says, I don't care, Greg, I'm doing it. So we shot it, and she did it. And we used it in the movie. And it really was powerful. Lupe pulled that off. I got to tip my hat to her because that was a difficult role. She really made that work. So the first thing you see in the end is the consequences of this action on the person that shot Selena. And it's horrible. And then you see the family and how it affects the family, weeping in the hospital. And then finally, the fans. Because when Selena died, by the 1,000, they gathered all over Texas with candles, mourning her loss. So you see the consequences on the shooter, on the family, and then the fans. And then we go into the sequence where, you see the real Selena from all these tapes that we looked at and that we used to make the film, and freeze-framed on her. And so, this beautiful shot of this beautiful young woman, 23 years old. 23 years old. It's heartbreaking. And so this is how we decided to do the piece, without dialogue, with dream-like images, using the concept from Greek tragedy of seeing not the act of violence, but how it affects the consequences on all the people. And that's how we did it.
I wanted to ask because I am one of those young, yes?
One of the young
So
girls.
I'm wearing
yeah.
a Selena t-shirt onto the stage next to the director. But I am one of those little girls that grew up and got to see Selena through this movie and grow up and see a positive role model for someone who, loves her family, who, loves her culture and represents so much. Could you maybe talk a little bit about when there's a lot of moments where it touches upon what it means to be Mexican American, and American. That scene in the car where you have to be more Mexican than the Mexicans and more Americans than the Americans. Yeah. I mean, I remember watching that like at 8 or something and screaming at my mom, "That's us!" Because for so many bicultural kids, you are straddling two worlds, and you do have to prove yourselves in both communities.
Yes. And that's my reality. I'm Mexican American, and I was born on the border, actually, in San Diego. But my world is San Diego and Tijuana, and I still have a lot of family in Tijuana. And we used to go back and forth across the border 3 times a week, And we had, familia who were Mexicanos, and then we were in San Diego. And so I grew up with that contrast between them, and I've always wanted to find a way to do that scene. That scene is entirely mine.
That wasn't
based on anything. That was my idea. Now it is based on the fact. It is based on the fact that one thing I noticed is that when Abraham wanted to talk to you, he'd get you in the van and lock the doors, and you'd be sitting there, and he's driving around Corpus Christi, you're ranting about it. So that came from him. But what he actually said was entirely my idea, because I thought, I've always wanted to find a way to put this across. And when they had this thing about how they didn't want to go, when they were telling me about it, how he didn't want them to go to Mexico because he thought that she'd be made fun of and put down, and she wanted to go because she, as he said in the movie, she just walks through every barrier to her, they don't exist. And that was her personality, and they had this conflict about it. And then AB and them, they finally talked their dad into agreeing to the gig, and I thought, here it is, my opportunity to do It's Tough to Be a Mexican American, and put my whole ethos up there, you know? And it was so funny because I was saying that when we had that screening with the 5,000 people in Los Angeles, they had memorized the dialogue. I mean, people, I didn't know. I mean, this film's become like a cult. Now, everybody here is part of the Selena movie cult.
It's like Rocky Horror Picture Show.
They watch it every week, you know, and they love this movie, or we love this movie, and so they would recite the scenes with the dialogue. But that scene, everybody knew it. And you had 5,000 people doing It's Tough to Be a Mexican American. The whole, night sky was ringing with 5,000 people, and they had memorized that entire scene. It really, as you say, is a scene that has resonated with our community tremendously, because it's true. It is very, very true. We're always having to prove that we're real Americans, but when you go to Mexico, it's like if you get the wrong case for some verb or some noun, you're a pocho, you know.
The wrong accent, if they can hear it.
Oh yeah, my God, you have to put up with all of that too. I love the part where he says, gringo food is too bland for us, but when we go to Mexico, we get the runs. Yeah. That, to me, is embarrassing. By the way, gringo is not a derogatory term. And people think, oh, it's like saying, the N-word or this kind of thing, and it is not true. Gringo is just the thing, and so if anybody thought, wow, he says gringo quite a few times in the movie, and that's offensive. It isn't in our community. It can be if you say pinche gringos or something, you know what I mean? If you're modifying it in a negative way. But basically, in our community, we live with apodos, nicknames. Everybody has got a nickname. If you're from Mexico City, you're
Jorocho?
well, a jorocho if you're from Veracruz. If you're from Guadalajara, you're a tapatio. If you're from here, you're a chinesco. Everybody has, no matter where you're from, they got a nickname for you. So the nickname for people from the United States is gringo, and it's not negative. It's just everybody calls everybody by some nickname.
You were telling me the
a
story.
Tejano if you're from Texas.
Tell them the story of where the actual...
Oh, where the word gringo comes from. It comes from the Mexican-American War, and when the American soldiers were invading Mexico, and they were marching, the most popular song, and the song they would use to march to, was Gring Grow, the Rushes Grow. Gring Grow, the Rushes Grow. They would sing that, and the Mexican people heard that, and they said, oh, gringos. Gringos meant they were coming, because they heard the song, And that's where the term comes from, but it's not a negative term in general.
When you were talking about those little girls, and you were one of those little girls, I wondered what you've heard from people over the years.
Chilango.
Chilango is Mexico City,
That's if you're from Mexico City.
Yeah, that's right. What have you heard from people who have seen it? There obviously is this cult, as you say, or people who've seen it many times, but what have been some of the comments that have stood out for you from the people, from viewers?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that, people are very moved by the film. And obviously, Latinos, Tejanos, Mexicanos, it's a huge film in Mexico, the Chicano culture, but it has really crossed over in, not when it was in theatrical release, because theatrical release, about 80% of the business was Hispanic. But it's crossed over in cable. There was, for many years, it was the most played film on cable, #1 for about 10 years. And it's still one of the most played films on cable. People love this movie. And so the film has completely crossed over. And everywhere I go, You know, people say, oh, you made Selena, and they love Selena. I'll tell you a story. I was at a weight loss place. As you can tell, it's something I do need to do more of. But anyway, I was at a weight loss place in Florida, and there was a good old boy from Texas, and he was in the weight loss thing as well. And we were on the treadmill together and this and that, you know. And so he goes, he asked me who I was, and I said, you know, I was a filmmaker in Atlanta. And he asked me, well, what have you done? What movies have you done? And I said, well, I made, you know, El Norte, and I made me filming, and I made Selena. Selena? Boy, that's the greatest film about Texas ever made. And, you know, at that point, I was his best friend. I mean, he was like, you know, he was a rich guy with a limo and the whole thing, and he was just like at my, you know, like at my feet, you know, like bowing at my feet, because I made Selena, and he loved it, you know. And everybody in Texas loves the film, not just the Tejano community. And I go to the Midwest, and everywhere I go, people have seen the film, and women. And, you know, this one young woman, I remember I was in Costa Mesa shopping, and she found out I made Selena, and she just started to cry, you know. And she was saying, you know, I have this issue with my father. And this movie captures a father-daughter relationship like I've never seen a movie. So honest, and it was just meant so much to me, and you just started crying. So, you know, whenever I make a film, I don't just make the films I make for a Latino audience. Of course, I want my community to love the movie. But what I want is to make a universal human statement. What I see is I don't see why you can't make a universal human story with Latinos. Why can't you be brown and, you know, and tell a father-daughter story that can touch every father and every daughter, and not just Latinos. And I really feel that this film, you know, achieved that, and that means a very, very great deal to me. It really does.
It completely did, and we need to see more films like this.
Yes.
And I think about her having broken, you know, through and being the first female Tejana singer and all of
Yeah,
that.
because people don't realize what the barriers were. That's a very sexist world, both in Texas and in Mexico. It's very hard for women to break through. So like the father said, no woman had ever broken through. And she was the first one. And not only that, she made suddenly Tejano music famous throughout the world, her. And so that was a huge, huge breakthrough.
And do you think this movie was sort of responsible for the direction that Jennifer Lopez took her career to?
Yes, absolutely. When we did the Houston Astrodome scene, now one of the things I had on this film was, and why I told Warner Brothers, we got to shoot this in Texas, was we had the support of all of Texas, because everybody loves Selena, but the Tejano community in particular. They would do anything for this film. So we want to do this Houston Astrodome film. We didn't have a huge budget. So we didn't have any money for extras. So we just put it in the newspaper that we shot this at the Alamo Dome, actually, in San Antonio. And we said, okay, we're going to be shooting this scene. And we would like you to come, and they're going to open the stadium up and the concession stands, like it was a football game or something. And please come and participate. 35,000 people showed up.
Wow.
You see them in the movie. They all came for free. And they stayed all day.
Wow.
8 hours of filming with 35,000 people. And that just goes to show you how much people loved Selena. And Jennifer, now I had shot this already with no audience, because the studio went, we got to make sure that we have it. We don't know what's going to happen when all the people are there and blah. None of that footage is in the movie at all. She gets on the stage, Jennifer, and this is the first time she's ever done anything like this. And she's been studying Selena's movements and all of this. And she starts doing this thing, and you see it in the screen. She just comes alive, Jennifer. It just, that relationship with that crowd, it just, brought her to life in a way that I've never seen. I was sitting there, I couldn't believe it. Because the day before, we'd shot a version without an audience, and it was like night and day. And of course, all the people were there because they're going like, is she going to do it? And is she going to be able to do this very well? And, they came to support the movie, but they also came to see if Jennifer could do this, right? And my parents were there sitting in the audience. and the family was there. It was like really a lot of pressure on Jennifer Lopez, okay? She comes out, and you talk about rising to the occasion. It's on the screen. She was dynamite. And I mean, the people around my parents were like going, oh, it's Selena. She's just exactly like Selena. And most of them had been to that concert. And they were all crying and cheering. And the family was crying because, of course, Selena had passed, and cheering because this was such a, Jennifer had done such an extraordinary job. It was the most emotional moment I've ever had filming in my life. It was like, I don't care what drug it is, nothing can compare to where we were all at emotionally after shooting this scene. And I got to hand it out to, Kirk Gardner and the crew, and to Barbara, because she did all the second unit work in there with the crowd. We had marvelous people shooting this and covering it. So, because it was all happening live, right? And you can plan your shots when nobody's there, but in the moment of that thing, you just got to be on it, capturing these moments, spontaneously, so they would be on the screen. And they are all there. And after it was over, Jennifer and I were alone in her dressing room, and she was still wearing her Selena costume, and I was holding her, and she was trembling with emotion, and I was trembling with emotion. We were crying, and it was that moment where you had done this impossible thing, getting Selena, capturing her, knowing that you had achieved this thing that everybody thought was impossible, and we were crying, and we were holding each other, and talking about what we had accomplished. And then she looks up at me and she goes, Greg, she says, I want that. I want to do that. Shooting that scene excited her so much that the next day she started calling about starting to have a music career. Wow. Because she didn't have an idea to do that before she shot that scene. And her managers and her agents, they all said, don't do it. Movie stars trying to do music never works. It's always a disaster, and it'll ruin your career. And she goes, I don't care. That's Jennifer. I'm doing this. And she did, and she became hugely successful in the music world. And I don't think anyone else has ever accomplished that. She had a #1 movie in the theaters and a #1 hit on the Billboard the same week. And no other performer in the history of the United States has ever accomplished that. And Jennifer Lopez did it.
Wow. Maybe Selena
I'll tell you something else about Hollywood. This performance, which she was nominated for the Golden Globe, she should have been nominated for an Academy Award. Without doubt. If this movie was made today, absolutely. But in those days, no. I went to Terry Semel and Bob Daly, who were head of Warner Brothers, and I said, let's do an Oscar campaign for Jennifer Lopez. And they looked at me and they said, we're not doing it. We're not going to put a dime into that. And I said, why? This is the most amazing performance. And they go, they're never going to nominate a Latina. It's never going to happen. It's a waste of money. So they didn't put any money into it. And as a result, you have to have a campaign if you're going to get a nomination. They have to know your studio's behind you. And they didn't put any effort into it. Like I said, things have really changed in Hollywood and in the Oscars from when we made this movie 20 years ago.
But
it's
not
sad.
changed enough.
But it hasn't changed enough. But today they would. They would do it. But then they wouldn't put any money into it. And the Golden Globe just gave her the nomination just because they knew it was a great performance. We had no Golden Globe campaign either. It was just, hey, that's great. And they did it. So hats off to them for giving her that nomination. But I definitely think that she should have had an Oscar campaign for this film because it's remarkable. And I was reading in Entertainment Weekly recently, and they were doing a piece about the movie, and they were saying that they felt it was like the greatest performance in a musical biopic ever done because of all the levels that she had to do in order to achieve it. And then what it did to her career. And now, she has become a huge music star. I went to her a premiere of her show in Las Vegas, and it was like I felt like Abraham when I was like, look at her, she's so great, She was tearing it up and dancing, and I just knew how much that meant to her to feel that audience. And the people next to us had paid thousands of dollars to get a ticket to see Jennifer Lopez perform. And I remember that moment when we did that Houston Astrodome concert, and you know how she had achieved that, and then brought that into her career, and went on to to become the iconic superstar that she is today. So it's a very special, very, very special movie, I think, on a lot of levels.
It is a very special movie, and we're looking forward to the next person you're going to discover. Gregory Nava, thank you so much for this.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.